about this week, we're talking about animation and digital files. And I have notes right here. So if I'm not looking directly at you, you can enjoy looking at the blue sky or whatever you want to look at. So first, we need to understand what pixels are. So that's the basic stuff. And you guys should know this by now. So pixels, remember, they're pixel elements. And you should be able to determine the number of pixels in a video based on the size. And you know that there are some basic sizes of video. There is standard def, there is a couple of different sizes of HD, and there is, of course, 4K. And you can determine the size as far as how many pixels are in a screen by multiplying the height by the width. So, for example, 1920 by 1080 would be 2,073,600 pixels in just one frame. Whereas SD, which is 486 by 720, would only be 349,920 frames. So, not frames, pixels in one frame of video. So, if we record 30 frames per second, that means that in 30 seconds, 900 frames, and so each one of those frames would be either 349,000 or 2 million-ish. And so for every 30 seconds, that's how much data we're getting on the card. So if we have an SD card and we're worried about space, what do you think would take up more space on an SD card? 30 seconds of SD video or 30 seconds of HD video? Or 30 seconds of Ultra HD, which is also known as 4K? Well, obviously, the answer is the SD, because it's less pixels, so it's going to take up less space. So one of the ways that we control space is through the actual size of the video. However, is it a good plan to save space by, say, recording something in standard def and then editing it in high def? So the answer is no, because you're taking a screen that has approximately space for 2 million pixels, and you're going to dump in basically something that has 300,000 pixels. And once we have that only 300,000 pixels to fill a space of 2 million, when we blow that up or scale it up, then what happens? There's just a bunch of space between those pixels, and we get kind of this blurry, horrible looking video. So that is obviously not a good way to shrink a file size. The better way is using compression. And so compression is when we take the file and we make it smaller. And of course, you know that there are different file types, right? And so when we think about file types, we probably heard of QuickTime, MPEG-4, JPEG, H.264, MPEG-3, WAV. Get the idea. These are all file types. But some of them are wrappers and some of them are codecs. So when we're talking about the difference between wrappers and codecs, wrappers are more like what plays the video, and codecs are more what basically shrinks the video. So, and obviously wrappers and codecs are kind of interchangeable, but like you've heard of a QuickTime movie player. Guess what type of file that plays? QuickTime. But I have a Mac, and so when I've been outputting these files, I've been using the codec of H.264, but the wrapper has been QuickTime, which we see at the end of a file as .mov. So if I tried to play a Windows Media file on my QuickTime player, it would not work. So a lot of times you guys don't pay attention to codecs and video file types because we're using YouTube or Vimeo, and we don't have to worry about that. But let me tell you, as a professional video person, you're going to have to care about that. So when I worked for a production company, sometimes we'd be outputting a file for a scoreboard to play at Three Rivers Stadium or Heinz Field. And so because of that, I needed to know what file type that particular software would play. Or maybe we were outputting something for a large video screen downtown. So you need to understand file types and codecs, because both are important. One is important for quality and size. The other one is important to make sure that the client can use it. So when we talked about those file types, we talked about QuickTime, we talked about MPEG, MPEG-4, we talked about H.264. So out of those three, which one is not a wrapper? And you guessed it, it is H.264. H.264 is strictly a codec, and we have a little clue there as to the file types because the file extension gives us an idea of what the file type is. So when we see .mov, we know it'll play in QuickTime. When we see .avi, we know that's an AVI file, which is probably going to play in Windows, but not necessarily in a QuickTime player. So H.264 is strictly a codec. So that being said, we're going to talk a little bit about color sampling when we get back. But in this playlist, I have included 2 videos that do an excellent job explaining the difference between wrappers and codecs, and they also explain how the compression works. And so I want you to go ahead and watch those 2 videos. I warn you, of course, they're being paid for, so there are advertisements at the front of it. There's also advertisements at the back end. And when you're watching them, here's what I want you to pay attention to. I want you to make sure that you know what lossless is, what a codec is, break down a definition, what makes a digital file, what is a high bit rate, what are containers, what is video compression, what is spatial intra-frame coding, and then they're also going to talk about inter-frame coding, and what is block motion animation, and I think that's it. So after watching those videos, and it might take you 2 times through because they go through the information super fast. Okay, take a look.